All right. Yes. My name is Marc van Oostendorp. I am a linguist. I work in the University of Nijmegen, where we are now. I'm a professor of, so my job is as a professor of Dutch linguistics, but I've been always interested in all kinds of languages. And in particular also in Conlangs, or whatever you want to call them. And then even more precisely, since the last, 45 years or so, I've been in one way or another involved in Esperanto movement. Yeah.
How did you get involved in linguistics? Like, what got you interested in it?
Well, I think the thing was, so when I was like 16, 17, I was thinking about well, I want to go to university, what do I want to do? I was very interested in science and in things like computer science on the one hand. But I was also extremely interested in languages. So I always liked languages, learning languages. So also as a small child, we would go on holiday, we would try to pick up languages. I remember one year we went to Wales, and so that I still remember Jan Vajabul Quin Gil Kukriquin Dropushan de Silio Kokokoch, which is this place name. They have this very long place name, so I learned it by heart. I never forgot. In these 50 years or what it is. So I thought it was a difficult choice I had to make then for languages, and then somehow I discovered this is not true, because you can study language in a kind of scientific way too, and then I decided that's what I would do, and that put me on that track, and then I never left the track.
What does your work look like? Like, I can't really imagine how studying languages works in detail.
Well, there's very many different ways of studying language. It's that one reason for that is that you can look at language from many different perspectives. So you can think of language as some kind of system. So it has a grammar, and this but the thing about this grammar is that not exactly the same as what you read in a book, in a grammar book, because we have all kinds of very subtle, detailed ideas about what's a good, well-formed sentence and what is not, and that for at least any natural language, that has not been described. So there's no, English is probably the language which has been most described, but there's still many details which have not. That's strange, because a child learns it within a few years, right? So it must be in some way simple, right? But we don't know what the simple formula is. Okay, so that's just one kind of enterprise, an enterprise I've been always very interested in. We are here on Nijmegen campus, where I think a lot of what linguistics is about is what's called psycholinguistics or neurolinguistics. So this is how it then actually functions in the brain. Right? So it's also, if you think about that, it's also a miracle. When I speak English, in which I'm sufficiently fluent, I don't have to think about my words or my sentences. I do it like subconsciously. Basically, I know what I say the moment I say it. Right? It's not just first I think, okay, I should say it. So how does that work? Right? So I make sentences, I get all the words, I turn those words into movements of my language or my speech organs, like my tongue, my lips, etc. With this, I make some kind of, I make some kind of disturbance in the air that reaches your ear. You also immediately translate that into some kind of idea. So if I say elephant, the moment I've said it, you have the idea of an elephant in your head, but you must have done all kinds of things, right? You must have somehow match this sound pattern somewhere in your brain to this particular idea of an elephant, etc. So that's what most people do here. So that's let's say the second way. I'm not very much involved in that. I mean, I learn a lot from my colleagues. But
are they also like working with, let's say, the medical departments together, like MRTs and scanning the brain for activities?
Yes, that also happens. So there's because all of this is typically goes very easy, but of course, I mean, people can have a stroke, and then there's certain parts of the brain are affected, and that can affect your language in all different kinds of ways. So there's people who are affected because they can no longer find the words. There's people affected because they can find the words, but they no longer can find the grammar, basically, right? So they just seem to say random words. There's people who have the idea that they speak and they make well-formed sentences, but all they basically say is t, and they don't realize it, right? So and that's interesting for linguists. That's interesting because you can learn. That means that these are all separate kinds of things which happen in your brain. But it can also be of practical use to help people who have this particular problem. So that happens. Yeah. So the third way is a way in which, again, I am interested. Is that language is also something which happens all the time between people. So it's also a social phenomenon. It's not just like an individual neurological or psychological phenomenon, but it's also something which happens while we speak.
Yeah.
So when we speak, as soon as you enter in a conversation, we're going to have something which is then usually called we're building a common ground, which means I'm not going to explain every single thing. I'm going to certain things I'm going to assume. So somehow I try to look at you and see you and feel you and see what is you already understand and what is it you don't understand. Right. So if I would have this same, so you're asking me this now. If like a 10-year-old child would ask me this, I would immediately give a different answer. I would change all kinds of things. Yeah, assuming that they don't know things you do know. If it would be a colleague, like a very famous linguist who would ask me the same question, my answer would again be completely different, etc. And not just in content-wise, but also in the shape of form and what kind of words you use and So that's and then finally, let's say the most traditional or the breakthrough of linguistics as something which you can study in scientific or quasi-scientific way is historical linguistics. So seeing how do languages change, how English, German, Scandinavian languages, Dutch, they're all Germanic. How can we reconstruct then what that Proto-Germanic language was, and Proto-Germanic and Latin and Greek and they all derive from Proto-Indo-European. How can we find that? So that was a 19th century adventure. I think this was this discovery in particular of Indo-European. I think was that's maybe the biggest thing which has ever been discovered by linguists, in my view, right? So it's because it's basically uncontested. It's purely theoretical thing because nobody has ever heard.
Really prove it, but it's just so logical. Yeah.
It's so logical, and also, I mean, people who are working in that field, they're still quarreling on certain details. But I think by and large, and it's also confirmed in certain ways, it can be confirmed. So the most famous confirmation is very old, but this is Saussure was a very important linguist, also a historical linguist, like 100 years ago, a little bit more than 100 years ago. He said that this Indo-European should have a certain sound, have had a certain sound, which you didn't find in any of the existing Indo-European languages, but indeed logic brought him to this conclusion. And then they discovered Hittite, so texts in Hittite, which was a very old Indo-European language, or maybe a sister of Indo-European. But they're exactly in the points where that sound should have been, they put a specific kind of letter. That's it, right? So that's a kind of classical way of making a prediction, and then the prediction is confirmed. So so you have very strict rules, and by you can derive it, and now I think we have kind of consensus for what that language must have been, but also from this we can derive certain things about the people who spoke this, because they had a word for wheel, or they had a word for horse, or probably horses were already something they had, etc. We can reconstruct a little bit their religion or their view of the world, because again, you can reconstruct that they must have Jupiter must have been something, a father figure, etc. We can all this. Well, so all of that is fascinating. You cannot do everything, right? So I've made certain choices. But this is not an answer to your question. Your question was, what do I do every day?
Yeah, what's
right?
your... Like I know about, like I myself also do some scientific writing, but it's definitely a totally different genre.
Yeah.
And I know the process of research and whatever, but...
what do you do if you study linguistics? Well, for at least, this is not for me personally, but this, if you do neurolinguistics or psycholinguistics, you do experiments, right? You do you do experiments. You put people behind the screen. You have them look at words and press buttons, and you see how quickly they react. Or neurolinguistics, you do MRI scans or whatever while they hear certain words. If you do historical linguistics, you do historical work, right? So if you do social linguistics or variational linguistics, you go out and do questionnaires. You ask people, right? And you try to see how. So certain people say this, other people say this thing like this, other people say that thing like that. How does that correlate to social differences? So is there a difference between how women speak and men speak, and maybe other genders speak? Is there a difference between different social classes? Is there dialectal differences or regional differences like that? So that is one thing I have been involved with.
Like for me, the reason I became interested in linguistics is I think because my parents are from Silesia. And they speak the dialect or language, whatever you want to call it, Silesian. And when language often describes identity or is used for an identity, and I personally just never knew, some people in Germany would think I'm not German, some people in Poland think I'm not Polish, and even some people in Silesia would think I'm not Silesian. So it's difficult to just, you need to actually dive deeper into the language or the culture to understand it, and I did that, and got very interested in the grammar, the etymology, the whatever of Silesian. And I'm not that proficient. Like I was born in Germany, so I never lived there, and I only.
What do your parents speak at home?
Well, I'd say it's more a mixture of Polish and Silesian. Like it's more of a dialect than it's.
And also
language.
to you.
Yeah. Not always also German. Yeah, and but like I never learned normal Polish. Let's put it that way. That's why I struggle a lot with like watching the news or something, because they use words that sound to me very academic.
Yeah.
They probably aren't, at least not always, but I just don't know them. And then I started like reading books in Silesian, like translations of Little Prince or The Hobbit, which there are some of, and that was also difficult because reading is different than speaking.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, reading it can be your native tongue, but if you haven't learned to read,
but it was at least easier than reading Polish.
Yeah. That's interesting.
And during the whole Corona time, where I had a lot of free time because well, my school didn't really organize well. I started. I found out about constructed languages and got really hooked on it. So
wow.
I don't know why Toki Pona fascinates so much. It's really not that special if I think about it, but it really gets a lot of traction, at least online. And we have had meetings. And
what do you mean it's not special? Because
it's not the first language that thought about that had the goal to be minimalistic. Like I think in the 50s there was AUI,
but it's the only one which is more or less successful, right? Which is a kind of community.
And I just want to think about why it is successful, or
why is this successful?
or why is it unique? What makes it different from others? Because even when it was started to being created in 2001, I think there were probably a lot of other projects that people also posted about online.
Yeah.
But this one stuck around.
Yeah. Well, my personal take on this would be typically that it's probably partly just some kind of coincidence or just certain factors. So let's move. So if you think about Esperanto, I think that's definitely what I think, because it's a similar kind of story. 19th century, there's many of these kinds of projects, many, right? And then also after Esperanto, people start revising Esperanto, so Ido, this kind of stuff. Is Ido better than Esperanto? No, I don't think so. Is it worse? No. So why Esperanto is, I think it's basically dialects of the same kind of system. But so one stuck, the other didn't. Yeah, why? Yeah, I don't know. It's just because it had, the classical part of the classical story is that Zamenhof published his book basically at the time when the Volapük movement was falling apart. Mm-hmm. So and many people were looking for something new, and then this arrived. They thought, okay, that looks interesting. We take this. So that, I mean, that's not really a rational kind of behavior, right? It's just kind of people we do this, and then at some point, because you have this community, so that's I think that so. Basically, the miracle is in the very beginning, right? So there's that Sonja Lang, in this case, she managed to somehow, maybe without even trying, as far as I know, but she managed to find people who thought, okay, this is nice, and then there's a group. So then this language has a group. So you can join that group.
Yeah.
Right. So I think, and why Sonja Lang? Well, I don't know her personally very well, but have interacted a little bit with her, for instance, because of that article. I think she's a very nice person, right? So it's very nice and communicative and open, and that also helps, right? So many of these languages, they have the creator who really wants to keep their baby for themselves. Yeah, that doesn't work, right? So then you will not have a
She always had a more descriptivist approach, in her books she described how what words people use and didn't dictate you have to use that and that word.
Yeah, that's an interesting remark, because was true for Zamenhof as well, and there was a difference between Zamenhof and Schleyer. Schleyer was the author of Volapük, and he was a Catholic priest, and I mean the picture I have of him is that he wanted to be the Pope of Volapük, right? So you couldn't do anything without asking his permission. And Zamenhof had this idea of making it a kind of open source project where everybody can do it, and that's what's same with Sonja Lang, right? So indeed, so that's what you call this descriptive approach. Yeah. So that's a social kind of argument. Is there anything inherently in the language itself? I don't know. I think probably there's certain mistakes you shouldn't make or something, right? But
What mistakes?
I don't know. I mean, this the vocabulary. If you want to have a minimal vocabulary, then the words have to be somehow spread out over the conceptual space of things you want to talk about, right?
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to make minimal language, but then you forget to include any kind of words which could potentially refer to the human body or something, right? Yeah, it's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
Probably. If you don't have any words, apparently if you don't have any word which refers to numbers, okay, then it can work apparently.
Well,
yeah, no, I'm joking.
Well, that's also the reason why we didn't say like 6th edition, but we said number and just the words.
Yeah, okay.
So
and then what are you going to do after you have?
Yeah, we thought about that, and we predicted that that won't happen until 2030.
Okay.
So
Wow.
I don't
2030 we're all dead or what? It's not so far away.
until then there are more words.
Then there will be more
Yeah.
new words. Yeah, but not 130 more. Yeah, right. No, but so this is what I mean. So obviously it should be, the thing you make should be usable. But I think many projects could. No, but so this is what I mean. So obviously it should be, the thing you make should be usable. But I think many projects could be usable in principle. So the way I see it, the main thing is really having a community.
Yeah, getting the spark for the community to actually like.
Yeah, and then it starts growing and growing, can start growing and growing and growing. Right? So I think now, if you wanted to make another minimal language, like according to the same principles, so suppose you would do that, and it would be really better in some kind of objective way.
Like logically, if you have your certain better is always objective unless you have subjective, unless you have criteria to actually say it's better according to this and this criterion, and there are no
there are no criteria. But even if there were, even if there were, we would all agree that there would be some kind of objective or intersubjective kind of agreement on what this is better, then I think it still wouldn't work. Then this would still be in its way. I mean, this is how, not just with languages, but this is how human invention often works, right? You have something, the QWERTY keyboard or something like that, right? So is that objectively the best there is? No, actually it's rather pretty bad, but it's never going to be replaced in the English-speaking world, at least by something else, it seems. So that, again, for Toki Pona, I couldn't mention some kind of defect. For Esperanto, I'm sure there are certain things which you would say, well, it's unfortunate, right? So I guess one thing would be about gender, so that feminine gender has a special suffix and masculine doesn't. Yeah. So that's unfortunate and maybe bad even, but it's not really replaced. Right? So there are people who say, we now say there's also a masculine suffix each.
Yeah, I heard about that.
But that's not mainstream somehow. It doesn't. It's at some point, and I think fairly soon. You have so you need a community. As soon as you have a community, the community works in a very conservative way.
Yeah.
And that's probably, I suppose that Toki Pona is also already at that point. That also Sonja Lang couldn't say, well, I don't think the word for human being should be Jan, it should rather be blah. Right?
Yeah.
There's no way to work.
Definitely. It's too late for that. It's already too ingrained into.
Yeah, too many people, and too many people do it, and then there's also you have to rewrite all of this stuff and stuff. So it doesn't work.
What do you think lies in the future?
What lies in the future?
Yeah, like
death and
constructed
destruction.
language-wise.
What do you mean? What lies in the future?
Esperanto, Toki Pona, do you think it will stay a bit more of a niche topic, or do you think, like, for example, Toki Pona, because Esperanto already had its chance, maybe, I don't know, that it will actually gain a bit more, it will snowball a bit more, that there will actually be like organizations and there might be a school or whatever. Like,
Yeah. So so what's the future of Toki Pona?
Yeah.
Let's stick at that. So to be honest, it's very unclear to me, and it's probably unclear to everybody what the exact growth is of Toki Pona,
difficult
how you call it, the
to-
community.
yeah, it's difficult to actually put a number on it, but I get a pretty good feeling of it that it's growing a lot.
Yeah. And this is what it is, and what it is now is online,
Yeah.
right? It's online, and online means what? So what's the most important online? Is it Discord? Is it
Yeah, Discord, or let's say Discord, yeah.
so that's the most important place,
Community
let's say.
place, yeah.
Yeah. And there you see there you can see growth, right? You can see that there's now so many people who are somehow involved in this. Yeah, it's a very difficult question, because it involves so many different kinds of things. So if we want the one step to the Esperanto community, is what you can see there now is that the organized Esperanto movement, which was the thing, so when I learned it 45 years ago, it was that if you were not part of the organized movement, so member of an association or subscriber to a magazine, yeah, that made no sense, because there was nothing online. Right, so you had to organize to get to know other people, because there was nothing online there that you would walk on the street and meet somebody. I think that has never happened to me in my entire life, right? So that there was somebody I didn't know and I met them on the street, and they were also Esperantists. Has this ever happened? I don't think so. Maybe once I met somebody in the train who was reading, but so that's what you have to recognize them, right?
Yeah,
so you
it's
don't
not easy to
recognize them.
recognize.
So they can wear like a green star. I said, but I don't think I've ever seen anybody with a green star who I didn't already know, right? Anyway, so the organized Esperanto movement is falling apart, but I don't think that means because there's fewer Esperantists, but because people are less interested in being an organized movement, and there's less need for this because of. So is that going to happen to Toki Pona? Is it also going to have these kinds of associations? I would say it's unlikely, right? Because Esperanto movement I'm myself president of the Dutch Esperanto organization. I think it's very useful still to have an organization, but it's just difficult. So it's also difficult to sustain this thing. So let alone starting one, right? So that I think that maybe it will happen, but I'm not sure.
Right now it's very anarchic.
Yeah, and that's at the same time that's the nice thing about it too, right? So
I think that's the appeal for many people.
It's also the appeal, yeah. So that makes and yeah, I think that it makes it very attractive that you can just it's attractive because it's simple, and so this is what made me interested in this idea that it is simple and that you can express all these different kinds of things. So as a linguist, So we know that there's two different kinds of meaning, right?
Mhm.
So the semantic meaning and pragmatic
Yeah.
meaning. And basically, so from that perspective, I would say Toki Pona is like a language which shifts as much as it can to the pragmatic layer. Right?
Mhm.
So we have some kind of very minimal semantic structure of only these 130 something words,
Mhm.
and then everything is shifting to the pragmatics, which means you have to know the context to understand what
Yes.
is being said, right? So 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 that's the appeal, and that anarchism is almost built into that,
Yes.
right?
Mhm.
So that is that makes it nice. So let's fantasize, right? So what would be the nicest road for this to go? Is that then at some point many people in the world get convinced that this is a nice mental exercise to
Yes.
do, right? So
Mental exercise, that's-
Toki Pona is nice because you can see the world in another way, or you can it helps you think about things in a certain way. And
I really think that, for example, it could be very well used as a tool for teaching about linguistics, about semantics in, for example, school.
Sure,
It could be a very good tool for that. I think.
it could be a very good tool for that in schools. Okay, in schools. So then you would need teachers. So then you maybe at some point, if this becomes very big, right? We are still fantasizing. Becomes very big. It becomes an obligatory subject in all German schools. You will need teachers. The teachers will need to have a degree. There will have to be some agreement about what that involves, right?
Yeah.
What would a teacher have to know to be able to do this, apart from didactics and maybe the basic grammar and stuff. So what thing are they going to teach? Or similarly, I was saying mental exercise because I think that's maybe it helps you think about language and linguistics. In some sense, it also helps you think, I would say, about the world.
I think many people find the appeal in Toki Pona that they can structure their own thoughts, because I see very many people who have themselves some form of identity problems, like they don't like. There are many transgender people who maybe before learning about Toki Pona struggled with their gender identity. There are people who, for example, are autistic and just feel they can't fit it in somewhere, and they feel that they can express themselves and their own thoughts to themselves better.
Yeah. Most of them would go away if it becomes too big and too professional. That's a problem. That's also the issue with Esperanto, by the way. So Esperanto. So I mean, the Esperanto movement, although has a kind of goal, right? So there is some kind of
there's an end goal.
Behind it, more or less. I mean, then nobody really agrees on what that end goal is, but let's say there is some kind of end goal. The end goal would be everybody in the world speaks it as their second language, and then, world peace, right? Everything, right? So because then we understand each other. So then we finally understand Putin because he speaks Esperanto as well, or whatever. But in the first place, I'm not convinced that this has been the major objective of individual Esperantists ever. Well, I mean, of course, there have been people who were very motivated by this, but I don't think this was really the majority ever. And I think there's many people now who think, so when they're part of this movement now, they also believe that what it basically is also this kind of alternative community. I think that's also a main attraction for many people. So it's very similar in that sense. And of course, I mean, there is also an overlap between Toki Pona and Esperanto movement. Yeah.
Would you be interested in scientifically studying about Toki Pona? Like, what is there in general to study about constructed languages? after all, they are constructed, so everything is already shown. Like you already have all the rules defined in some way.
Yeah, but that's probably not true. So that's what makes it interesting. So
Yeah.
I think is that if once a language starts functioning, you will not have all the rules.
Mm-hmm.
So there will be, I mean, in the case of Toki Pona, it's complicated because it is so simple, right? The syntax is so simple. But I would suppose it's basically too simple to express many thoughts, so people will have kind of workarounds. And so I mean, this is just, I'm just now imagining things, but so one thing I could imagine is that because individual sentences are so simple, right? So you basically only have like subject, verb, object, and then you have this la kind of construction, and that's it. There must be ways to connect sentences to each other,
But
right?
definitely.
And that is not described. And
it's
but
not meant to be, but
no,
I
it
personally
cannot be
use
otherwise.
it.
Otherwise, you cannot tell. I mean, otherwise you can just say, I sit here, I eat a fish, I walk home. That's not going to be a story, right? So let's say that every sentence expresses a proposition, a thought. Those thoughts have to be connected in some way. And that could be one thing to study. What is and that must be so certain kinds of conventions must have developed already on this. Again, so then without anybody ever writing it down or saying it, then so that would be one thing to study.
There are no relative clauses, like real relative clauses in Toki Pona. And for most languages, there are some ways to, I know the German word, but I don't know how to express it in English, to have nested sentences. I think in all languages, but that's already...
well, there's debate about that.
Yeah.
There has been debate about that. So there has been actually a very fierce debate about it about 15 years ago, about a language called Bidaha, which is a native language of the Amazon, which was claimed to not have this kind of stuff. Not have recursion.
Do you believe there is some way to actually define what a language is? Like are there some rules? A language needs to do this, this, and this to be a language, like the Chomsky universal rules.
Well, so this kind of Chomskyan rules, I don't think would help because then because I mean that's basically a kind of formal definition. So you have to satisfy these kinds of formal criteria. But then it would become kind of circular because then you say, well, only those things are languages. So then you can never have a counterexample.
Okay.
Right. So I think you want to define this in some kind of functional way. So it's a fact that all human communities have language.
Yes.
Right. So that's it. It's something very inherent to being human. So there's a few human beings who don't have language, but that's never ever the normal state of being.
Well, I guess the humans who don't have language also can not easily be part of a community.
They cannot be part, and actually they will have all other kinds of problems.
Yeah.
So which will be the reason why they don't have language to begin with. So normally a child grows up and gets the language of the community. So and that's all around the world, everywhere. Okay, so we don't want to say the Bidaha don't have language.
Yeah.
Right. So there is some. So we have to find certain kinds of, I would say, functional criteria of what a language is. So it's certain things you do with language.
Yeah.
But it is some, yeah, but okay, but formally it's, I think so every language has words. I think that, for instance, that's uncontested. So every language has words, which themselves consist of a finite, of some kind of string of a finite set of choices called consonants and vowels.
Yeah, or for sign languages, but I
Yeah. But actually, also for sign languages, that's the same. So the word in sign language has certain components which are not vowels and consonants, indeed. But then you have hand shape. You have so there you can decompose it into a finite set of smaller parts.
Yeah.
And so logically that's not necessary, because if you have a language like Toki Pona, you can have just like one random sound here and one random sound there, and etc. Right? So that could, but I don't think language ever works that way. So that actually would be an interesting experiment, to have a kind of version of Toki Pona where you replace, so where, I don't know, Toki is and Pona is, and this kind of random sound without any kind of internal structure. I think the prediction would be that wouldn't somehow not really work.
At least that would sound really alien.
It would be really alien, but then you can say, well, but I don't know, Citel and Pona, that probably doesn't have any kind of internal structure, or
well, in some way, like all the colors have a similar structure to them. Like I think all use a similar shape, or
yeah, maybe it does. And also, actually, of course, graphically, you have a circle and you have straight lines. And
there were already people who tried to make keyboards for writing Citel and Pona, and you have like circles and arrows in different directions.
Yeah. Well, that's another thing to study. You see, so I think that's one reason why Conlangs would be interesting is to test like the limits of what is possible. When can you still say? So that's what makes Toki Pona in particular also interesting, of course, because it is to some extent like that. So can it work with this very simple structure?
I thought about the Sapir-Whorf hypothesis. How do you think it actually, like constructed language, actually influence thinking? Like, if you have a language that doesn't distinguish between the color green and blue, people are less likely to be able to differentiate the actual colors.
Well, it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I mean, so it is, because you look around here, you can differentiate all kinds of different shades of red, although we don't know names for that, right? So basically what it means is, because if you do certain kind of tasks, for instance, which involve memory of colors, it becomes a little bit easier if you can name them. Yeah. But a little bit, right? It's not an absolute thing. So it's definitely, for our perception, it's not the case that we only perceive things which we can name.
Yeah, okay.
Also, another problem with this is that it's a very interesting question, but the problem with this is that Toki Pona, for instance, definitely doesn't have native speakers, right? So you would want to test this with native speakers.
That will sadly never work. Like
that seems less likely.
Yeah, I think bringing up a child only with Toki Pona would be cruel.
Probably. But something of this sort has happened with Esperanto, although I don't think there has ever been like monolingual Esperanto speakers.
Yeah.
But there have, and makes that language. That's one thing which makes that language interesting from a linguistic perspective, because it was supposed to be simplified. And then my master's thesis was about that. So it was about the Esperanto of native speakers. So and then about the syntax. So what happens to the syntax then? Is it still as simple? So there's all kinds of ambiguities, and how are they resolved? And actually I found there are certain things which are a bit funny on among the native speakers I studied, which are a bit different from how it was described, etc. Yeah.
But in general, it's not that different, or
No, it's not radically different. No, it's so people can understand each other. Yeah. No, that would be very strange too, because they learn it from non-native speakers, right? So they learn it also to communicate with their non-native parents typically. I think there is I think that there are third or maybe even fourth generation speakers even, but I don't know them. For instance, I don't know who they are, so I'm not really sure that they really exist or what that means.
it would be interesting to find.
But second generation definitely.
Actually, do you have any questions for me? Like, I prepared some, but prepared a lot.
Yeah, so you invest quite some time in this Toki Pona business. Is it there's one, so you got attracted basically out of curiosity, of kind of linguistic curiosity, if I reconstruct what you say, right? So you have certain personal reasons to be interested in languages, and then you encountered this somewhere, and you thought, okay, that's how does that work? How would that work? What keeps you going?
Well, that's actually a very good question. Like, a lot of time when you actually want, like, for example, we try to publish every month a magazine. It doesn't work. Definitely not. I have so much other things to do, like actually studying and my work next to studying and so on. What keeps me going is what other people create. And I want to be part of that too. Like, I see that other people make games, write books, or invent this or that, and I just really enjoy that. And
but so that also is because it's new, right? So it's a kind of pioneering spirit or something, right? Or would you also be as inspired if it would be 100 years old and people would have created all kinds of things in the past?
Definitely nicer because I actually can meet the people.
You can meet the people.
Is there some sort of holy grail of linguistics? I think that's a very open question, and I personally would answer it with historically the discovery of Proto-Indo-European. But otherwise, maybe you.
Yeah, but it was a good thing I started describing that you have these very different kinds of activities which are all called linguistics.
Yeah, it's very broad.
So the holy grail. So I guess the holy grail of historical linguistics would then be to find if that really exists, the first language, right? So that's language that's some, because I think what we now know, there's also something called evolutionary linguistics, which is, how did it develop language capacity within humans? As far as I know, I'm not sure there's consensus, but very many people now think that it is very likely that when Homo sapiens came out of Africa, they already had language, which then implies that all existing languages in the end are derived historically from that one common ancestor, right? So that there is one common ancestor to all human languages. There's things to be said against that too, because there are also people who believe that the first language might have been sign language indeed, so that all spoken languages could then have developed independently later, but okay. But if this is the case, then there would be one common language, and on a smaller scale, maybe Indo-European, so sometimes said Indo-European and Semitic, for instance, that they may in the end have a common ancestor too, longer ago. so far it seems unlikely that we're ever going to get that Holy Grail because it's just too long ago. And so it's going to be too many insecurities building. There's too many things we don't know. But that would be the Holy Grail, I guess, of comparative historical linguistics would be to find the one common ancestor for all human languages.
Would I have a time machine, I would just look through history and.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe that would be. So maybe a way to find it is to build a time machine. I think the common grail of more neuropsycho, or also this would be to find, well, for instance, to find this one formula which explains how is it possible that we learn languages. So there's basically two questions. So the other kinds of linguistics have. So if there's two basic questions, is why are all languages so similar in a certain way, and in what way? And then the other question is, why are all languages different? Right. So why is that the case? Why? So because that's from a communicative point of view, that's very surprising, right? If you say, well, language is this, what most people think. Language is a means of communication. That's what we use it for. But a good, well, as you know, a good means of communication actually is heavily standardized, has no variation, doesn't change, like that, right? So language is completely the opposite. So why?
Because
I mean, it's not just cannot just be some kind of imperfection, because every language varies and every language is changed. So it's really an inherent property of language. Why? I don't ask you to answer, because if you answer it now, then I can close shop and go home. Right?
That's a good question.
Well, I mean, there's kind of partial answers. You can say, well, partly it is maybe because people use languages for different means. So if you live in a very highly industrialized society, maybe you have different needs than if you live in some kind of hunter-gatherers community. Languages which have a lot of second language speakers, because second language speakers learn a language differently from first language speakers. Maybe they're different for that reason. So there's certain kinds of small things which maybe, but it doesn't explain why every single individual speaks different from every other individual in the end.
Then
That's the Holy Grail.
Yeah.
So to explain why all languages are similar and yet they're also all different.
What would you recommend to people who are interested in constructed languages? Like, to add to that, like, a lot of people that are interested in constructed language are like teenagers who do that a lot as a hobby, and maybe they want to pursue some form of linguistic career, maybe not. Like, what would you recommend?
Well, I think most teenagers who are interested in this, I think the first sign very typically of this is that they construct their own language, which I think is a way to explore linguistics. So you can and actually I think that can help to get access. So Peterson wrote this book, The Art of Language Is it Language Construction or something like that?
I think so, yeah.
That I think is a very nice book, but basically because that is a kind of introduction to linguistics, but doing it in the opposite way in which it's usually done, by which you take existing languages and then you analyze them. But he shows how you can, let's say, synthesize a language by the same kind of knowledge. But you can do it yourself as well. You take any kind of book on phonology or syntax or anything, and you can start thinking about, okay, how can I make this more interesting, and what could I add, and just experiment. Right? My first suggestion for this always is to first think about who are the supposed speakers of this language. Typically, they're fantasy languages for some kind of fantasy community. Okay.
I have similar approach because many people ask me like, hey, could you take a look at this and this? And I usually say to them, well, what's your goal? And usually they can't answer because they don't have it like really, they haven't really clearly what's my goal with that language, or not, like, is it used for fantasy? Is it used for whatever?
Yeah.
In my
and then
opinion,
if it's used for fantasy, are these the speakers? Are they, I don't know, snakes, or are they ethereal beings, or you know, what kind of body do they have? All these kind of things you have to think about. Yeah.
And in my opinion, if it's for fun or art or whatever in that direction, I don't see the point in restricting oneself. If you want other people to actually learn or decipher it, let's put it that way, it needs to be, well, learnable, obviously, but there is the one language here on the first page with the different heads and stuff and that also is a very good example for something like it was uploaded through a few YouTube videos and they have many 100,000 views already.
No, I can imagine, and then in the end, I mean, you can do it. I think you do it for fun. It's not you don't have to have any purpose with it either. If you do it because you're interested in languages, then also one thing about this, you said it's a funny way of doing tone, and that's what it is, right? So it is a kind of what we call suprasegmental phenomenon. So it's something which some kind of, we speak. So I speak, I move my lips and my tongue and stuff, and make vowels and consonants. Okay, that's one layer. On top of that, I have the layer of doing my higher tone, lower tone. This all I do all the time. Well, okay, but we can also maybe add this hat thing or whatever, so that it fits into some kind of category.
Yeah. Well, that always does. If people will invent something totally different, I will forward it to you.
Sure. I mean, what's at the same time interesting is one thing which is we mentioned a little bit sign languages. What is interesting, what I've always found extremely puzzling, is there is not really a language which really mixes sign language and spoken language. Well, let's say, so it's a spoken language, but the word for hat is this. You see, so I say, I put on my, or something like that. That just doesn't exist. Where you systematically do that. So it is, you have sign languages, everything we know about sign languages is that they, apart from the modality, function exactly like spoken languages do. So it's the same kind of system, it's used in the same part of the brain, it's just the same, but we don't mix them.
That's also an interesting thought that would...
But that language does, right? So it uses some, I mean, it's not a sign, but it uses some kind of visual signal interspersed with or mixed with or on top of vowels and consonants, which are spoken.
We do that with our face, like
that's
the emotions we show.
So hand movements. If we do it a little bit with, there's a little bit there. Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah.
What about pursuing the job of, I don't, like, not everybody can be a professor of linguistics, obviously.
Well, we can dream.
I don't think so. Yeah. What would you recommend for someone who thinks, hey, I want to study linguistics? Like, what can they expect from...
Come to Nijmegen. Yeah, no, I mean, this more in general, I think this is... so if there's things you find really interesting, try to do them. Try to study them. And... I mean, you can do other things. So my personal history in this is that also I was very interested in linguistics, and then at some point, I went to study this, and then you couldn't really study linguistics in the first year. At that, now you can in Dutch universities. At that time you couldn't. You had to study a language, which is a different thing because first it means you also have to study literature. You also do literature. It's one specific language which you study. So, like most people who want to do linguistics, I did Dutch. But then after the first year, I was a bit bored. And I became very interested in computational linguistics, actually. Or at least that's what I thought. So I went to study, I did computer science as well. So I had also done this for a while. And this made my father very happy. Because he said, okay, finally he's going to do something in which he can get a good job. and then I tried to combine the two things. So I was at that time. I mean, now I read it a little bit better, but at the time, I started as an expert in computational linguistics. But I just moved and did other things. I think it's it's your life. You have to do things which are you have to do things which are interesting, and also I think you have to do things which are important. And I happen to think that linguistics is extremely important because it's it's something about which we know very little, and that is language. And at the same time, it's something which is extremely crucial to our being. But of course, I mean, I don't deny that chemistry or other kinds of things are also important and interesting. You have to find the thing which is important. So I don't think I don't do it for fun. I do it because I think it's important. In the end, it's important. And most people don't agree, of course. But that doesn't matter. That doesn't matter because they're wrong.
Yeah. Okay, that's. I think that's everything I have. It was very nice talking to you.
It was nice talking to you.
Yeah.